So, hello, greetings. It's Dr. Thomas Daffern here, and it's my weekly day of reflection. It's Sunday, and I'm, going to be talking about the fact that today is a very important day, actually, in the calendar of the world's religions, and so on. So it's sacred for many reasons, not least because it's Pentecost in the Christian tradition. And in the Pentecost teachings, this is the day on which the disciples received the Holy Spirit, and it comes 49 or 50 days after Easter. So I'll be explaining why Pentecost is so important and what it actually means. In the Jewish calendar, it's what's known as the Festival of Weeks, or Shauvot. And that's also a very sacred and important event in the Jewish calendar for my many Jewish friends around the world. And I'm going to be explaining what that means as well. And then I'm going to talk about the kind of theology or metaphysics of current global politics, what we should be doing to try and manifest this, this miraculous time. It's also the day of St Columba, who is a very important saint to me, and I'll explain a bit about him and why that's important. And then I have a personal bit of news that is also quite dear to my heart, so I'm going to share that right at the end. Why this day is always going to be important in my life and that of my family. Okay, I'm going to start by explaining Pentecost because, as a religious studies teacher for many years, I've always been fascinated by this day. I think it's true to say that if this day hadn't happened, the Christian church would never have happened. There'd be no such thing as Christianity. It was a movement that was in difficulties, let's say. The rabbi Yeshua had been crucified. Some people had reported contact sightings. Mary Magdalene was the first, and that's why we're running a Mary Magdalene Society here in France. We've had a couple of conferences, we're having another one, because Mary Magdalene is obviously part of the Gnostic, detailed wisdom teachings that Christ transmitted, along with Thomas and other inner disciples. So, but, this day was very important because it was the day on which the Holy Spirit came upon the disciples. Let me read it from Acts 2, and then I'll comment on it. So, while the day of Pentecost was running its course, they, the disciples, were all together in one place, when suddenly there came from the sky a noise like that of a strong driving wind, which filled the whole house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues like flames of fire, dispersed among them and resting on each one. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to talk in other tongues, as the Spirit gave them power of utterance. Now there were living in Jerusalem devout Jews drawn from every nation under heaven. And at this sound the crowd gathered, all bewildered because each one heard his own language spoken. They were amazed, and in their astonishment exclaimed, "Why, they're all Galileans, are they not, these men who are speaking? How is it then that we hear them, each of us in his own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, inhabitants of Mesopotamia, of Judea and Cappadocia, of Pontus and Asia, of Phrygia and Pamphylia, of Egypt and the districts of Libya around Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them telling in our own tongues the great things God has done." And they were all amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What can this mean?" Others said contemptuously, they'd been drinking. But Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. Fellow Jews, and all you who live in Jerusalem, mark this and give me a hearing. These men are not drunk, as you imagine, for it is only 9 in the morning. No, this is what the prophets spoke of. God says, this will happen in the last days. I will pour out upon everyone a portion of my spirit, and your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Yes, I will endue even my slaves, both men and women, with a portion of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show portents in the sky above, and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and drifting smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before that great resplendent day, the day of the Lord, shall come. And then everyone who invokes the name of the Lord shall be saved. Men of Israel, listen to me. I speak of Jesus of Nazareth, a man singled out by God and made known to you through miracles, portents and signs which God worked among you through him, as you well know. When he had been given up to you by the deliberate will and plan of God, you used heathen men to crucify and kill him. But God raised him to life again, setting him free from the pangs of death, because it could not be that death should keep him in its grip. And it goes on. I'm not going to read the whole text because it's a beautiful passage. Read it yourself. If you haven't read Acts, then please do so. I'm doing a recording on different parts of the New Testament so far with a commentary, which I've already completed the 4 Gospels and some of the letters of Paul. And I've also completed a commentary on the 2 Gnostic Gospels of Thomas and Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene's only in fragments, sadly, but it's still quite deep. This text is very interesting, and it's a famous incident. It doesn't say where they were. Were they indoors? Were they gathering outside? Were they, under some trees somewhere? All it says is that they were all in one place, and suddenly there's like a jumbo jet flying over. There's a noise like a strong driving wind, which filled the whole house. And then these tongues of flame appear, and they settle on the heads of each of these disciples of the 12. And so we know that Thomas was there, Peter, and so on. I suspect also that Mary Magdalene was there, and probably Mary, the mother of Christ, and others, the innermost circle. Scholars have studied, what does this mean? What I think my interpretation is that I think it was a real event. I think this happened, possibly not, exactly in the way described, like a sort of Hollywood drama, but I think it was happening. It was a sort of moment of breakthrough when the disciples all had that aha moment, when they realised that you can still contact the risen Jesus through your own spiritual inner sight. Rudolf Steiner talks about this in his book, The Knowledge of Higher Worlds, which was one of the first intelligent descriptions that I'd come across as a young student, as a young man, studying in Canada, when I first saw what this actually meant. Steiner tries to describe it in theosophical terms, and if you don't know that book, I recommend you read it. I think what it's talking about is the spiritual ascendance that happens, which Buddhists call enlightenment, and Hindus call moksha. And in Hinduism, it's understood to be the elevation of the kind of energy of one's being up to the highest chakra. So from Muladhara, the concerns with materialism and all the questions of matter and wealth and power and money that the lower chakras represent, they're ascended gradually to the highest chakra, which is the place of samadhi, where everything is seen in its interconnectedness, where everything is seen as one, ultimately. But in its intricate detail, that unity is then comprehended spiritually, intellectually, and philosophically, and experienced as such. So it's not a sort of theoretical, proposition that you study, as it were, from outside philosophically. No, it's an existential encounter with the living unity behind existence. In the Hindu tantric Buddhist tradition, it's seen as the rising of Kundalini to the highest point, and the overshadowing, actually. And so the saints of Hindu Buddhist tradition shown with halos, which is the ascended Kundalini of enlightenment. Buddha is depicted in art as having achieved this, obviously, on the night of his enlightenment. And it's potentially there within us all, that awakening, that energy ascension. And many people are studying it now. You can listen to the Buddha at the Gas Pump website where they're talking, it's lovely. He's always talking to like American pioneers of spirituality who are having these kind of enlightenment experiences. The man who runs that wonderful website, he himself has had some of these experiences. He worked with a Maharishi, who was a great yoga teacher who made this enlightenment possible for people in the West, including the Beatles and others. More and more people have had those kind of experiences, and yes, it's a download of cosmic consciousness that R.M. Buck even wrote about in the earlier part of the 20th century. So as a phenomenologist of religious experience, I'm very interested in what that enlightenment is, and I've written a book called Enlightenments, when I talk about how we compare and contrast different enlightenment experiences as reported in the literature of different sacred traditions. So in Sufism it's described in a certain way. Irfan, the ego goes, you're at the feet of the beloved, you're taken into the divine abode of the ultimate verity, of al-haq, the truth. It's described differently in Shintoism, or in Confucianism, or Taoism, or in Buddhism, and so on. This is the Christian equivalent, right? And this is, very powerful, I think, a historical report of when that enlightenment is made available to everyone. You see, in the Gnostic, Buddhist, esoteric tantric schools, it's quite difficult to access. If you go and talk to a Tibetan Lama about enlightenment and say, I want enlightenment, they'll say, fine, you become my disciple, and maybe, in a few hundred lifetimes of hard study and slog, you might get it. In the Zen tradition, it was speeded up a bit. You can get it in this lifetime. But you have to sit very still for at least 30 or 40 years. And if you're like Bodhidharma, you have to sit unmoving, watching a cave. It's very hard work. What the Christian tradition is saying is that actually Christ was trying to speed this enlightenment up for the planet. I see Christ as a great bodhisattvic being, a great meta-Mahayana teacher, an enlightened sage, a Buddha, if you want, a Tirthankara, or whatever, an avatar, to use Eastern terms, a Messiah, to use the Western term, but who therefore, the job of the Messiah is to speed up the collective enlightenment of everybody. It's not to kind of say, here, I'm the Messiah, I've come to judge you all, I'm going to kill you all. It's to say, look, I've reached a plane of enlightenment which we can all reach, and if we all reach that together, hey, it's going to be an amazing world that we can live in, which will be a world of peace, right? Because that's the goal of all this traditional ascension and enlightening and the rising and all the rest of it, is the peace that then comes from it, which is a transpersonal peace. It's not just lying, cheating diplomats signing a temporary truce like Molotov and von Ribbentrop, Germany and Nazi Germany and Russia lying between their teeth and plotting how they can destroy each other. Or like Iran and America signing a deal that America then tears up because they're like that kind of rogue nation. They think they can do whatever they want, and when they sign treaties, if another president comes in, they have every moral right to just totally change it. I mean, how can one trust the USA diplomatically after this? Its credibility is completely, pre-Pentecostal. pre this experience of enlightenment, which is very sad because there are many, many amazing wise Americans, as there are Iranians. And I think we the people have to come together and demand of our leaders that they live up to our traditions. No proper Christian would ever go back on their word, as Trump has done. The man is a complete charlatan, I'm sorry, and without honour. And for all his profession of some kind of faith, he is completely lacking in the absolute basics of diplomatic integrity, which is truth and veracity. So anyway, let's go back. So Pentecost is the moment at which this download of enlightenment comes to everybody, every nation, Parthians, Medes, Romans, Jews, Arabs, and they all hear it in their own language. Now this is what's so beautiful about the working of the Holy Spirit, which is the vehicle of the collective enlightenment of the planet, if you want. Because enlightenment is beyond any one speech tradition. I'm reading a book at the moment by Umberto Eco on the search for a universal language. In the Druid tradition, we say that Phineas Farsay, the founder of the Druid schools, founded a language school just before the Tower of Babel was destroyed. And he preserved in the Druid schools the teachings of the original language of humanity, which was Gaelic. But it wasn't just Gaelic in the outer sense, it was that invisible telepathic language of absolute unity. So I think what's happening in here is a telepathic experience that all the people are listening, and they're hearing it in their own language, be it Greek or Hebrew or Arabic or whatever. And that, I think, is what true wisdom always sounds like. And you can resonate to it, whatever your language. You could be Iranian, listening in Iran, or Jewish, or whatever. Truth is universal and resonates in all the languages. So that's my interpretation of how the Holy Spirit speaks in every single language. And then Peter goes up basically to say, look, you've just crucified someone that was God intoxicated and able to bring us to this place of enlightenment and the divine love. And what a tragedy. And it's interesting because the bit I didn't read out says, when they heard this, they were cut to the heart and said to Peter and the apostles, friends, what are we to do? The people who were listening, who maybe didn't know the whole story, they didn't, like most people were just bystanders in the big events of life. I mean, people are being persecuted today, like Assange is being stuck in prison for trying to reveal truth. And false accusations are being made, or what appear to be false accusations. And God knows how many thousands of people are in prison at the moment as I speak for false accusations and being sentenced and brutally, punished. The Holy Spirit is God's liberational, project to liberate us all from the ignorance that imprisons us all. So the way I see it is that this amazing text, which is very ancient, you should read it and also learn to read it in the Greek and reflect on it. It's saying how in spite of all the impossible suffering, I mean, the teachers died, right? And yet God is still sending this download of divine grace and consciousness and enlightenment potential in among us. Well, that's the day we're celebrating today, and I think, as I say, it was a real experience. And it's what then gave strength and fortitude to the church to then go out and preach and teach, because so what, you might say? Well, so what? Just another collective enlightenment experience, a little explosion. Well, yes, but it was at a very important historic time in history. It was the meeting cusp point between the whole Oriental world and the Roman Empire, the Occidental world. It was happening in the Holy Land, which is the midpoint between Europe, Asia, Africa. It was like a fulcrum of history, and which then had repercussions and ripple-out effects throughout later history. As news of this event, Pentecost, and the resurrection and so on, got out, and was shared everywhere up to Scotland, where St Columba was studying this. I mean, it's wonderful, amazing really, that today is both Pentecost and also St Columba's Day, June the 9th. I want to talk a little bit about that now, because when I lived in the Castle of the Muses in Scotland, I was not far from Iona, which was his main island where he lived and taught. And I've always loved Columba. I knew about him for years, and that's one of the reasons I moved to the Castle of the Muses, was because I sensed I'd be coming home, so to speak. He was born in 521. He was actually Irish and was from an aristocratic background. He was from the princely classes of the Irish. But he was trained probably in the Druid schools of Ireland and Christian schools. They were both. You see, when Ireland became Christian with St Patrick and the others, St Bridget, it never lost its Druid wisdom. It kept it. The Irish had been highly intellectual, civilized people for millennia, centuries, before Christians ever arrived. They had their Druid teachings. They had their, what I call the metaphysics of paradoxical simultaneity, which is my attempt to sum up the metaphysical teachings of Druidry. Things happen on multi-levels, and they happen synchronistically and simultaneously, and they go off on different levels of being. All worlds are interconnected. And so for the Druids, you see, the gods can walk in here as I'm talking and come and sit down. You know, if we have eyes to see, we might see that. Or suddenly I might be drawn away and have to go on a magic quest to find some magical island where I'm given a chalice that breaks apart if I lie, like Cormac MacAirt was summoned by Manannán Mac Lir, the god of the sea. All these traditions of the Druids mean that the worlds are interpenetrating. We have to be on good behaviour all the time, therefore. The point of the Druids was because they have cosmic wisdom, they can see clearly, which is what Druid means. They can point out when we get things wrong. They can point out when, oh God, you shouldn't have slaughtered those 10 women and children there. Oh, you naughty king, go and, do obeisance and give them all, 100 farms and walk on your knees up to, the mountain top to make amends. That's what the Druids' function was, because it keeps the balance of the worlds. If we human beings act unethically, unjustly to each other and to ourselves even, we disrupt the essential harmony between heaven and earth, which is what the Chinese sages knew. That was the function of the Chinese sages, be they Taoist or Confucian. Confucius knew this. He was like a Chinese Druid. He says, look, the job of the sage is to balance heaven and earth through proper attention to education, first and foremost. That's the key thing, which means our own awakening as people, our getting to the point of Pentecost, if you want. But also ritual, prayer, ceremony, music. Confucius realised they're all important, as do the Druids. So St Columba did, and he was raised with all that knowledge. But like the other Irish Samuels of the day, he resonated with Christ. He read the text of that book of Acts that I've just read out about Pentecost, and he got it, just like I've got it. The connection between this is like the Druid Enlightenment experience, and this is what they were doing over there. And Christ, he realised, was like a cosmic Druid king who'd come to help rebalance all of the planet, which has fallen into total darkness, and war and violence was being done at the time of Christ. What was going on in the different halls of power and in Rome with the Emperor Tiberius and Nero and these really horrific characters, unbelievable. I mean, they're still doing it if you read the stories of what these, mad Brexiteers are doing with all their cocaine parties and just totally malicious and Machiavellian, and they think they're above cosmic law, and they think they can hijack Parliament and just do whatever they want, like sort of little Neronian dictators. Well, no. What Columba was saying is that there is a cosmic law, be you approaching that through the Druid path or through the Christian path. It's the same cosmic law. And it's to do with harmony and balance and peace. And therefore the actions we should undertake as human beings are to maintain and strengthen that peace. the most important of which is our own education. Anyway, Columba was a very interesting man. He founded monasteries in Ireland, in Derry, in 546, probably in Kells. And then in 565, he left Ireland and went to Iona with 12 companions, which is this most incredible little island, which I've been to several times, off Mull. If you haven't been there, you must go. It's just, I don't know, there's something about the air, the purity of the air, the purity of the light. The sea is always just sparkling around it. And at every point on the coast, there are little coves where you can sit with sandy beaches and also amazing rock pools. And the pebbles on the beach, a lot of them are quartz, they're crystalline. It has a kind of a clarity about it, Iona, that is, friends of mine, writers have called it one of the esoteric portals of humanity. It's where that divine truth can focus in on to us. And that, I think, is why Columba chose it. He was obviously a highly intelligent and wise man. And he set up a monastery there, which is still going. There's a thing called the Iona community that lives there, and you can go and spend time working there. And they do wonderful things. They've rebuilt parts of it, the abbey. They have services every day. Today, no doubt, there'll be a big service going on for Pentecost and Columbus Day. They have a great choir that sings Teze songs and so on. If you haven't been on retreat to Iona, you should go. There's also an Anglican retreat centre where you can book it up and stay, and there's guest houses all over the island, or you can pitch a tent. So, Columba, in the end, he spent his life in study, prayer, and reflection, and also, fathering as an abbot this community of monks that he developed. And there's a life story being told about him by a dominion who was a great abbot of Iona some generations after Columbus, but he met people who'd known him and who told him personal stories. Columba, the name means the dove. Colum Kille was the name in Irish. And it's the same origin as the word Columbus, who was the discoverer of America, but obviously slightly differently said. But it's the dove of peace, essentially. One of the most interesting stories I like from a dominant's biography of St Columba is that a monk watched Columba at night. He would sometimes go out and go for a walk alone on the island, and he would come to this particular hill, which has ever since been called the Hill of the Angels, and he would sit in prayer there for half of the night. And this monk followed him one time, because Columba had said, "Don't follow me, I'm going to a secret place, just don't follow me." This monk broke the rule and followed him. And he lay behind a stone wall and watched as Columba, in prayer on this hill, which I've been and I've meditated on. It's not that high, but it's, maybe 100 feet or something. And what the monk said he saw was that Columba in prayer was communing with angels that were ascending up and down onto the mound. Now we can only say these must have been spiritual beings, angels if you want. And they were visible to this monk. So Columba had a kind of energy force field about him that was enabling this contact between this world and the other worlds, the supernatural kingdoms, to be thin, transparent, diaphanous. That's what the truly great saints can do. And there are many other stories in the Dominant's book about telepathic exchanges and precognition. Columba knew things were going to happen before they happened, and they turned out right, etc. He was a miracle worker. He was a senior Druid and Christian in the most profound sense of the term. He worked for peace. He went to Ireland. He tried to mediate between warring parties, and he, a dominant, later got together the first ever peace treaties in European history, that the Irish tribes agreed, not to fight each other. and agreed to honour the Dharmic law. So these peace treaties were like non-violence treaties that Adomnan was inspired by his knowledge of Columba's work to then bring into formal existence as a legal binding peace agreement. What I'm trying to do as a scholar is to get a legal binding Adomnan type treaty between all the religions on the planet. I want to extend that Irish miracle that happened to see the leaders of the great religions sit down and formally write out, a legally binding peace treaty. And if Adomnan got it, and Columba, who was helping him, got it through the Irish tribes, who were some of the wildest and most violent known to man, then it's a doddle to do it for the world's great religions. We can do that between Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and all the rest of them. So that's. I was inspired to do that at the Castle of the Muses, living not far from Iona, and that is now online. It has its website, the Interfaith Peace Treaty, it's called. Adomnan finally died on this day, June the 9th, in the year 597. And he'd been working right up to the last minute. He was writing away, copying books. Obviously, everything was done by hand. He was a scribe, a scholar. He was working on commentaries on various biblical books. And he was in the church this morning, 9th of June, early. And he knew he was going to die, but he died in peace. And he left some writing and I think most important, he left faith, okay, so what is that faith? Well, it's that which came at Pentecost. It's this faith in the miracle of the Spirit of wholeness. You see, my understanding of what the Holy Spirit is theologically, I've researched it, and I spent a couple of years in London when I was a young student. I went around all the second-hand bookshops, Christian bookshops of London, esoteric bookshops, buying books on the Holy Spirit, and tried to really what is this Holy Spirit thing? It was obviously very important, I realised. I was going to Quaker meetings and Buddhist meetings and Alice Bailey meetings and whatever at the time. And I realised the Holy Spirit is the key to peace on this planet still. But what is it? So, as a philosopher, I wanted to know, not just experience. I mean, you can sit in Quaker meeting, you can do deep prayers, and you can download that sense of wholeness. You can have that enlightenment glimpse. But what is it that you're glimpsing was the question I was asking. And I'll come back to that point shortly. I now want to move on and just look at what this day means to the Jewish community. Because this day, Shauvot, is also very sacred to the Jewish community. And this is an example of the paradoxical simultaneity of existence, For both Jews and Christians who continue to, they're kind of both the same and different to each other. For the Jewish community around the world, they're also celebrating from yesterday through till tomorrow is the 3 days of Shauvot. And this is known as the Festival of Weeks. It seems to have begun as an agricultural festival. It occurs 7 weeks after Passover, Easter. And it is a symbol of the first harvest, because what happens is it's a festival in which 2 loaves of leavened bread were brought to the temple as a concluding rite. So at Pesach you have unleavened bread, and then now you have leavened bread, and it's a harvest festival. So what you do is it's a bit like the Christian harvest festival. It's the first harvest.